Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, when we're the problem as a player, and the value of a hiatus. All right, so I want to talk about experience I had this year with Dungeons and Dragons, and realizing I was a problem as a player, and then finally the value of a hiatus. Right, so much earlier in this year. I was in a Dungeons and Dragons game, and and these were my friends. It was one of the groups of people I play with, and this is a very tactical group. They play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, right? And I know a lot of people don't even consider Dungeons and Dragons crunchy, but I consider Dungeons and Dragons very crunchy, right? Like, because it's super combat focused. There's a lot of detail in the combat. Only players that would play like super deep cut Pathfinder or Zweihander or some of the old OSR stuff would really consider Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition non-crunchy, right? So I consider it very crunchy, and this particular group is very build focused, right? So they're the kind of group who they want the core four, right? So they're like, we need healing in here. We got they're the group that is gonna say, hey, Bobby, you need to play a cleric. They want the cleric, the fighter, the wizard, the rogue, right? And so that all the bases are covered. Somebody can figure out the traps. And they play the very game very tactically, right? Now I am not included because I'm a good player. I'm included because two of the players I'm good friends with, and they invited me in, right? And I really like to support dungeon masters that are still growing their skill set, right? I think it's really important for us to make sure we're playing in other people's. I'm convinced in order to become a great dungeon master, you have to be a bad dungeon master first. Like, a lot of people just don't understand. That's the math, right? It just really is. You're gonna make some classic mistakes, and people's social abrasion is gonna be your learning currency, right? It's just a fact, right? So we're in this game, and everybody everybody in the campaign has, it's like we're in like the fourth or fifth, we're in the fourth or fifth session of the campaign, and everybody has their builds just clicking, right? And my build, I'm a terrible player. I'm an absolutely terrible player. Essentially, I don't really care about optimum builds. I care about narrative. I care about, really highlighting my story, right? So I barely even belong in this game. That might have been part of the problem, right? But I don't think this is really unique to me. I think a lot of tables, like people talk about, oh, this type of player and that type of player, and you should do this and you should do this. But a lot of times people are just playing with the people who are physically close to them, and you get some really unusual, strange situations that get set up, right? And so we're playing, and we go into this area, and we encounter, right, a specific group of a mixed group of enemies. Two different factions have opponents who converge on our party at the same time, right? And my character dies, right? And at this point, I am just incredibly frustrated, right? Because one of the things is I had tried some really innovative solutions in the game, right? But this, during combat, right? But this particular GM is Dungeon Master, it really digs tactical play. That's why all the players are there, except for me, and really respects strong builds, right? And a lot of times when I would try really innovative solutions in combat, he really wasn't trying to make that help it. He wasn't really trying to help make any of that happen, because a lot of times I'll try innovation to kind of shortcut the fact that a narrative innovation to shortcut the fact that my build is pretty weak, right? And by the way, it's absolutely antithesis to me to go get a build online. I can't bring myself to do it, right? So I'm just not a great player. My builds are weak, right? My player character builds are weak. and it became a problem in this game. So every single player comes out of this thing alive, and I died, right? And I'm incredibly frustrated at this point, right? Because I've had these narrative innovative solutions that I tried to put into the combat, utterly rebuffed, right? And I'm torqued, right? So I'm just not feeling great. And everybody's like, hey, we'll get you res, Scott. And I'm like, don't worry about it. Let me roll new, and I'll roll new, right? And they're like, well, you're gonna miss a lot of the combat for this game. And I'm like, and so I'm furious. Like, at this point, I'm really torqued, right? And I'm like, okay, listen, I need to not care about these characters, right? So it really makes a lot of sense for me to, like, cause like we're in like hour 3 of a 5-hour session, right? And we're in session 3 or 4 of, what's probably going to be, which one of these games that has no end date, So I'm just like really just frustrated because the way I like to DM is not being shown here, right? So I'm like, hey, well, you know what I can do, right? If I just let that character go and roll up a new character, I can treat this like an OSR, right? Like one of those funnel games where, my characters just die on the regular, and part of the fun of this game is just going to be me building new character after new character after new character, right? So I'll just use these characters in an expendable way, and I'm like, I'll be less like emotionally invested in this if I have less time with each character, right? And I'm seeing these characters as like potato chips, just crunch them and grab another handful, right? And so like this is a tactic, and I'm thinking, okay, let me do this, right? And I'm like, hey, don't waste, don't interrupt the progress of the party. Don't expend needed gold to get me rezzed, right? Don't expend literal game time, like real world hours, trekking me back to the city, or to the nearest city. Just let's keep this rolling, right? And and then one of the players is like, listen, Scott, that build, you got to and then he says, I couldn't believe it. He's like, you really need to read the rule book more closely, right? And I'm like, what? Like, yeah, it was like, right. And so then another player jumps in with their helpful advice that I need to get better at my builds, and I'm just like, I'm just like, oh man, this isn't good. And then, finally the DM's like, they're right, Scott. And I was was like, listen. And at that point, I said some unkind words. That's what I'm going to tell you. I said some unkind words, period, right? And these are my friends. So now I said unkind words to my friends. I disrupted the game, right? And I am the problem. Right? Now, there were problems with the game, but my reaction was not warranted, because it's never warranted to say unkind words to your friends, right? It's not appropriate, right? And so I was the problem, and I realized I was the problem. And I walked away from I walked away from the table that night, and I didn't talk to my friends for like 2 weeks, right? And because I was so spun up, right? And my friends all reached out to me, right? And they're like, hey, when are you coming back? And I'm like, what are you talking about? When am I coming back? Did you guys, I said unkind words to you. And they're like, whatever. We love you, Scott, right? And I'm like, what the heck, right? I was shocked at the response of my friends, that they're so forgiving. They forgave me without me even apologizing, right? But then I did 2 things. I apologized to each one of them, right? And then I took a 6-month hiatus from Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I realized the reason that I was so spun up over this situation was that I have an incredibly narrow view of how Dungeons and Dragons should be played, right? I'm like, this is how you do it right, and this is how you do it wrong, right? And that led to me saying unkind words to my friends. And I'm like, this has got to be stopped, right? So one, I was taking this hiatus from Dungeons & Dragons. I care about Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is the number 3 thing in the world I care about. There's 2 things in front of it, right? You got to have your priorities straight, right? But number 3 is high, right? I care an incredible amount about Dungeons and Dragons. There are very few things in the world I care about more than Dungeons and Dragons, right? And I was, like, so one, you need this time to remember that nothing can ever get to the point where you're saying unkind words to your friends, right? And so I stepped back and I was like, I am the problem at the table, right? And I need to address this. And so during that time, I really reflected and I read some articles about being more tolerant of other people's play styles, right? I watched some streams for some games that had completely different play styles than I liked, right? And I really forced myself to step back and say, this means too much to you, right? And in that you can't hold your opinions as strongly as you're holding them, right? And I can't believe, one of the things that really blew me away was I couldn't believe my friends and I even communicated this to my friends. I'm like, that situation can't happen again. That was not appropriate for me to say unkind words to you based on what had happened at the tables, right? And so, but what blew me away was how, eager my friends were to get me back at the table, which I really, to this day, I don't really understand it, right? But I'm just fortunate, and I realize how incredibly blessed I am, right? But I wanted to tell you, so one, I think the point of this video is to say you should pay hyper close attention to recognizing if you are the problem at the table, right? Because sometimes you are, right? And honestly, I wish that I had been able to learn this before I had said those unkind words to my friends, that there had been some other trigger, and I'm hoping that this video can be that trigger for you. So, right, because if you hold your opinion of Dungeons & Dragons incredibly highly, right, and you're to the point where you're even being disrespectful to people when you're speaking to them about Dungeons & Dragons, you really need to step back, right? Now, for me, that was a 6-month hiatus. It was fantastic, right? I desperately missed the game, and when I came back from that hiatus, my appreciation for the game was higher than ever, right? And it was really incredibly important for me to be reminded of how important the game is to me, and that with the hobby is knowledge of the books. The hobby is knowledge of the community. The hobby is knowledge of the history of the game, right? But central to the hobby is respect for everybody at the table, right? And if you ever are in a situation where you are not consistently giving respect to everybody in the table, you need to take an action, right? For me, it was a 6-month hiatus. It was incredibly successful. It was valuable, right? I needed to take time to teach myself a new path on how to interact with people about dungeon mastering, about playing, about character builds, right? About just being a better person at the table, right? For you, it might be something else. The key part is that you're watching to see if the problem is you, right? Don't let the situation get to the point where it gets all the way to the point where you say unkind words to your own friends, right? So it's just a warning from me to you. Watch to see if you are the problem. And then also, if you find you are part of the problem, determine a path, right? Figure something out and try that thing. For you, it might be a week away from the table. I don't think a week would be just one missed game. It might be a month away from the table, right? Or it might be you apologizing for things you said in the past. Or it might be you giving gifts to people at the table, right? Let's say somebody doesn't have their own dice set, right? If you got a little bit of extra, maybe you could, give dice. Maybe you could even buy a copy of the rules, an extra copy of the rules for the table. That's just going to be there, an extra book that somebody can snatch up. And, but the point is, watch to see if you're the problem. And if you are, take steps to fix it. Right? That was my journey, and I appreciate you letting me take the time to share it with you, my journey with you. I think it was really valuable, and I hope that your table is better for me sharing this cautionary tale. Thanks again for letting me share it with you. Have a wonderful millennium.